Passage in Mark chapter 2 that you may be familiar with. Jesus, when he was ministering to his disciples and to others in the community, he said something in verse 17 of that chapter that's a bit striking. He says, healthy people don't need a doctor. That seems like a no-brainer, but what he says next is very significant. He says, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I haven't come to call those who believe themselves to be righteous, but those who know that they're sinners. We all understand that when it comes to the medical field, that it's the sick ones that go to the hospital, generally speaking. They're the ones that are seeking the medical attention, the help of a physician, and the expertise of the professionals in that field. But Jesus takes that and applies it to us as, in the spiritual realm, us as sinners. He says, if you don't understand your need for redemption, I've got nothing to offer you. If you don't acknowledge the fact that you're sinful and you don't have a desire for a remedy, then again, there's nothing that I can help you with. He says, I've come for those who know that they're sinners. And here's why it's interesting. If that's true, which of course it is, then Jesus is saying that he's come here to call together unhealthy people. Gather us together, right? And and that's us. So I'm calling you unhealthy right now. I'm saying that we're sinners. We're the sick that he's referring to in Mark chapter 2. Jesus calls us together, and then he brings us together into one place. You and I would call that church, and that's what we're doing here right now. But the reason he does that isn't so that we can pretend that we're not sick. Okay, that would be a mistake for us to pretend like we've got it all together. He doesn't call us into the same place so that we can collectively ignore our sin, pretend we don't have it at all, ignore our weaknesses and our shortcomings, and ignore the weaknesses and shortcomings in each other. That's not why he's done it at all. He's brought us together so that we can recover from it, so that we can assist one another in the process of becoming healthier people, as would be the case in a hospital. So there's a couple things this evening. We gather together like we do right now, first of all, with the personal acknowledgement that we are unhealthy. Okay? I hope that we can at least start there this evening, just like we would on any other given Wednesday or Sunday or any time we come together. I hope that you've already acknowledged that fact before you came to Christ at all, that you are spiritually unhealthy. Secondly, we gather together with the understanding that everybody else in this room is also. Okay? You're not the only one who's got problems. And some of us, we may be, oh, my problems are huge. And others of us may be, so I don't have any problems at all. We all do. We all do. And they may be on varying levels of severity, but we've all got problems. We're all sick. And that's why we're here, or at least I hope that it is. Once we come to grips with those two realities, that we are unhealthy and that everyone else is also, then the church, if it's a healthy church at all, it becomes a place where we can both give and receive help with our sin. It's one of the primary reasons that I think Christ has built the church and has helped us to establish one here, is so that we have a place where we can come to both give and receive help with our sin. If you got a Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 7. This too is a familiar passage. Judge not that ye may not be judged. It's a very famous passage. The world uses this one all the time to try and protect themselves from accountability, when actually the passage is commanding us to provide one another with accountability only in the proper way. So let's read it together. Judge not that ye may not be judged. In verse 2, Jesus says, for with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it'll be measured back to you. He says, well, why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye, but don't consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? He says, hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Jesus is known for using illustrations like this to really drive the point home. Some would suggest that this is a rather comical illustration, that when he refers to the plank in somebody's eye, he's referring to sort of a 2x4 or a telephone pole. Like, this isn't just a speck of dust. This is just some crazy object that obviously makes it impossible for you to see very clearly to help somebody else remove something that's, a fraction of the size of what you got in your own eye. To boil it down, what he's saying is, you are very unable to help anybody with sins when you've got the same ones in your own life 10 times over. So he says, instead of excusing yourself from the responsibility of helping the people around you with their sins, deal with yourself first, and then you can embrace the responsibility I've given you to help the people around you. He's not dismissing us from that responsibility. He's not saying, don't judge, and then leaving it at that. That's the way the world interprets it. Don't judge. That's not what it means at all. We're actually called in this passage to judge one another, but we're to do it rightly, and not until we've appropriately judged ourselves, got our own sin under control, so that then we are able to see clearly and help the other with their sin. So that's what that passage ultimately means. But we have a dual responsibility in the church. The first one is to let our own personal sins be addressed and our own personal sins to be dealt with. But then the other side of that coin is then to address and deal with the sins of our brothers. And there are two kinds of people in the church, and I suppose this is, sort of along a spectrum. But on this end of the spectrum, you have some that are more than ready to help others deal with their sin. They seem maybe even a little bit eager to be that person who helps everyone else deal with their sin. They want to be the advice giver. They want to play coach, counselor. They want to be that individual who always is there to help somebody else and call them out on their issues because, quite frankly, it helps them ignore their own. Makes them feel less sick, less in need of any help. That ultimately is the problem that they have. That's the sin. It's the self-righteousness that they have in them that needs to be dealt with. There's others on the other side of that spectrum. It's not that they're eager to help anybody else. It's that they're the ones that are constantly struggling with sin. They always need the help of other people. They're never strong enough to stand on their own 2 feet. They're never strong enough to be any benefit to the others. And so people on that end of that continuum seem to just sort of resign themselves to being spiritually sick. And that's half the reason that they always are. I mean, if you could put this into a physical picture, this is a guy who's just always, snot and sniffling and coughing, and just as soon as he gets better, he gets himself sick again because he's still so full of germs and he's just perpetually sick. And so you've got really people on both sides there. But the Bible calls us here to be both ready to give the help to others that they need to recover from their sin, but also to receive help from one another in our own fight against sin. Okay? Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 says, "Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ." Okay, Paul writes to the Galatians, he says, bear one another's burdens. Now, to bear one another's burdens, you get the idea that that's reciprocal. I help you bear yours, you help me bear mine. Okay? And that's how we fulfill the law of Christ. What exactly is the law of Christ? Okay? Galatians chapter 6. If you go back one chapter to Galatians chapter 5, Paul already mentioned it. He says the entire law is fulfilled in a single decree, quote, "Love your neighbor as yourself," end quote. Love. What's the law of Christ? It's the law of love. Romans 13, verses 8 and 10 says, "Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law." More familiar passages like Matthew 19:19, where Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." James, the half-brother of Jesus, in chapter 2, verse 8 of the letter he wrote, he calls it the royal law. He says if you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you're doing well, okay? So James acknowledges that this is the law of Christ too. It's the bearing of the burdens of others in conjunction with others helping you bear yours. That's the fulfillment of the law of Christ, a universal, irrevocable law set forth by the Son of God himself, that we are to bear one another's burdens. I help you with yours. You help me with mine. And the law of Christ isn't being fulfilled unless both are happening. Okay? So those of you who are on this end of the spectrum and you love giving help to everybody else, you need to ask yourself tonight, why are you so reluctant to accept help from others? And until you do, you aren't fulfilling the law of Christ, which is your duty and obligation. Those of you who are down here on the other end of the spectrum, you need everybody's help all the time. Your burden is so heavy, you just always need somebody to come along and get you out of a fix. When are you going to get the plank out of your eye and be strong enough that you can assist others with the burden they're carrying so they don't get crushed beneath their own weight? To fulfill the law of Christ implies that we need each other desperately, and we can't be lopsided, always offering help or never receiving it, always receiving it, but never strong enough to offer it. So tonight, as we get going here, you might want to ask yourself, which one is the greater challenge for you? Giving assistance to those who struggle with sin, or receiving assistance, which requires you to admit that you struggle too? According to this passage, we'd better be prepared for either scenario. There's going to be times in your life, they'll come and go, but there will be times in your life when you desperately need the help of other people if you hope to recover from your own personal sins. You can't do this alone. That's why God called you to the church. It's just the way it is. And half of us are like, well, I don't like that. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we were just like solo, Lone Ranger Christians? It's like, I don't need you, but I kind of do. You're gonna be in that position sooner or later, where, if you're honest, you'll realize you need the help of others if you hope to recover from personal sin. But there's also going to be times in your life when your help is needed to deliver someone else who's being crushed under the weight of their own. And you need to be ready for that.